If you expose your child to new experiences, yes, they might not like the first time. Yes, they might make noise. Yes, they might be uncomfortable about trying something new, but you are helping them by making them braver and realizing they have it within themselves to persevere through temporary discomfort. And what we know is that the way self-confidence is built is not by your parents telling you how great you are. Self-confidence in kids is built through them recognizing their abilities within themselves.
Welcome to the ADHD Guys podcast with Mike McLeod of Grow Now ADHD and Ryan Wexelblatt of ADHD Dude. Learn about parenting kids with ADHD from two male licensed professionals who specialize in ADHD and executive functions. No fluffy parenting advice, only practical information that will help you help your child.
Welcome to the ADHD Guys podcast. My name is Michael McLeod from Grow Now ADHD, and I am an executive functioning specialist.
And my name is Ryan Wexelblatt from ADHD Dude. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in ADHD. So today we're going to talk about a subject that Mike and I talk about a lot, which is what we could call the ADHD comfort zone. And this is a topic that we both find is very challenging for parents. The reason that this is difficult for many parents is because many parents, for various reasons, have difficulty pushing their child out of their comfort zone. However, we know that in order for a child to grow and develop skills, they need to be outside their comfort zone. So, Mike, you had a really good graphic. I think it was like a week or two ago, where with the comfort zone. Why don't you explain what that was?
Of course, yeah. So when it comes to this ADHD comfort zone, the way that I describe it as the small and narrow ADHD comfort zone. I think at the end of the day, this is sort of the natural and innate goal of many ADHD kids. They like to find the one, the two, the three things that they are comfortable with, and they want every single day to look the same with preferred tasks. So we know that ADHD is a disorder of self-motivation towards non-preferred tasks. So these kids will find what are the preferred tasks, which most often will involve screens, YouTube, video games, things like that, and they'll create their small and narrow ADHD comfort zone and try to make as much of their life as possible revolve around that. So really what we have is that small little comfort zone in the beginning of the circle, the small comfort zone where kids feel in control, they feel safe, they feel like they're getting constant dopamine release and instant gratification. And then right outside of that comfort zone is the fear zone. So the fear zone is really when we're doing something new, when we're doing something challenging, when we're doing something non-preferred. The things that don't give us pleasure, don't give us a dopamine rush, like homework, like studying, like chores, like calling a friend or doing something outside, like exercise. The things that are really actually beneficial and healthy for us, unlike screens. And then outside of the fear zone is the learning zone and the growth zone. But when you look at this image, which we'll be happy to share in the show notes here, the only way to get to the learning zone and the growth zone is to get through the fear zone first. So teaching kids to have the resiliency, the grit to push through that fear zone is an unbelievably crucial life skill. If we can teach them to persevere through a challenging, non-preferred task, we're giving them a skill that they're going to be able to use for the rest of their lives.
And Mike, to add on to that, I have this saying that kids with ADHD have a propensity to say no to anything new or unfamiliar. And that could be because, like you said, it's just the fear of the unknown. It could be their fear that they're not going to be good at something. Or
Correct.
It could be just their inflexibility, that they don't want to have to do anything outside of that comfort zone. So I think before we get into talking about some strategies about how parents can help push kids out of their comfort zone, I think we need to address the pushback we receive about this topic from parents. And I think we really have to talk about why this is so challenging for parents. I just wanted to share two stories that both happened this week. So one of them, I was meeting with a parent for a coaching session, and her son was, I think, 8 or so, and has some social anxiety, and he walks around with his, his jacket or his shirt covering his face, most of the time. And this has gone on for several years now. And I said to her, look, if you want to help him overcome this social anxiety, and the good news is anxiety is the easiest thing to treat, you're going to have to stop accommodating him, and you're going to have to not allow him to walk around with his face covered like this, And I said, and he's probably going to be upset with you, and he's going to be very uncomfortable, because in order for him to, to be able to push through the anxiety and realize he has it within himself to overcome social anxiety, he's going to have to experience this discomfort when you stop accommodating him. And when I said that, she started crying. And, she was crying because the idea of, her son being uncomfortable was so incredibly painful to her. And I said, this is about him having a better quality of life, so he's going to have to endure some temporary discomfort to have a much better quality of life. And I shared with her as well, an example of, a boy I know who never got help for his social anxiety, and now he's in college and, barely has any friends and barely lives, leaves his apartment and really has almost like no quality of life, aside from playing video games or whatever it is he does. So that was the one. And then the other example was during my membership site office hours last night, a parent asked a question about perspective taking. And I was explaining how, with perspective taking, we have to help kids understand how they're coming across to others. Because if we as parents don't do that, then they're going to learn it from their peers who will not be empathetic necessarily or very nice about it. And another parent, chimed in and said, well, I'm scared that if I, explain to my daughter how she's coming across to others, she's going to carry that around for many years and think that I'm being critical of her, or it's going to be harmful to her. And my response to that is, it will be much more harmful to her to experience rejection from her peers than learning this from her mother, who she knows loves her unconditionally. And I think, Mike, and I want to hear your thoughts about this. One of the things that I have found over the past several years, and particularly being, in the mental health field, is there's been this shift, and I don't know why this has happened. We could maybe blame social media, I don't know. But I've seen this shift in the mental health field of clinicians teaching parents to treat their kids as fragile and, rather than anti-fragile, and teaching them to protect their feelings rather than help them to develop resiliency. And I think both you and I see that, right? Because when we talk about this on social media, we both get pushback about it, right?
Yeah. And this is a really alarming trend. And I just did a video about it today about how we are often hearing professionals on social media and even in some therapy circles of individuals in private practice where we're sort of over pathologizing these kids. And the growing parenting coaching theme here we're seeing from parent coaching professionals is to decrease demands because your child may have anxiety and we don't want to push too much on them, or they're exhausted from masking all day and they were masking their symptoms the entire day. So we have to lay off and pull back on expectations from them. And we're seeing that, if you push them out of their comfort zone and push them away from their passions, you're going to create trauma, and there's going to be more trauma and more issues here. And really, this is a pretty new phenomenon, and there really isn't research to back this up. Really what we're looking at here is, especially with our kids with ADHD and executive functioning, we have to remember so few people realize that ADHD is a disorder of self-awareness. So these kids have a really perplexed view of their strengths and their needs, and they don't really have future thinking skills. They can't project themselves into the future and delay gratification and do hard things now that benefit them later. So it's really hard for kids with ADHD to know what's best for them for their future. It's hard for them to do things now that aren't going to benefit them until later. So they really, especially 18 and below, 21 and below, they need adults in their lives to hold them accountable, to push them out of their comfort zone, because this is not traumatizing them or causing any sort of pathological problems. This is pushing them into the skills that they need for life. So it's not about, just accepting the no and your kid hearing no and say, oh, he says no. I can't tell you how many times parents call me and say, I want to sign him up for Grow Now services. I want to sign him up for executive functioning coaching, but he just says no. I know he needs it. We fight every day. He's not doing homework. He's not even going to school. He has no friends. His room's a mess. He doesn't eat. He doesn't sleep. He's on screens all day. But I asked him about coaching and he said no, so we're going to go find something else. And that blows my mind. Like this kid clearly needs help and you're putting it in his hands. You're letting him choose if he does coaching or not. You're letting him choose if he does these things or not. You as the adult need to be the authoritative parent. And as you say so well, Ryan, step into your parental authority and push these kids into the things that we as the adults know is best for them. They may not like it. They may complain the first couple of times, but you're the adult. We're not forcing them into 20 years of hard labor and things that are going to hurt them and cause them bodily harm. We're pushing them into things like, robotics club and, Dungeons and Dragons and tennis and golf and, swimming, karate, free play at the YMCA, going outside, going to the playground, riding bikes. Things like that are not going to cause trauma.
Mike, I think when you were talking about that, one thing I wanted to mention was that I think right now in our culture, there's a tremendous amount of confusion between temporary discomfort and trauma. And I think a lot of parents have this fear that if their child is temporarily uncomfortable, that will cause them some type of trauma, And one of the things that I always explain to parents is in cognitive behavior therapy, we have something called thought distortions. So a thought distortion is a thought that has no evidence to back it up. So for many parents, their thought distortion is what we would call catastrophic thinking. They think, if I make my child do something like participate in a healthy activity like the ones you mentioned, well, then they're going to be traumatized, Or if I teach my child how they're coming across to their peers, then I'm going to damage their self-esteem and they're going to be sitting in the therapist's office 20 years from now, right, talking about how, my mother, talked about cringy thoughts and, right. And what I always explain to parents is I ask them, I say, what evidence do you have of that? And then I explain the concept of catastrophic thinking, because I think one of the things, Mike, back to your point, is that social media has validated a lot of catastrophic thinking. Because in social media, particularly I'm thinking of like Facebook parent groups or in Instagram, whatever, we have a lot of people giving opinions about things that are not backed by any evidence. They're not facts, they're opinions, right? And this is how I think it kind of validates this catastrophic thinking. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's exactly kind of this, this new theme we're seeing here now that, parents are falling into this permissive trap of always just accepting that no and kind of always validating your child's thoughts, always validating their emotions. Yes, you want kids to feel heard. Okay, I hear you. Okay, I see you don't want to do this. I can see you're uncomfortable. I see this, but I can see this, let's chat after it's done. Let's go through it a couple of times, make a commitment, and we can have a conversation. But this is an expectation and not a choice. That parents need to get more into that mindset of making things an expectation and not a choice. You can't put everything in the hands of the child. I always use the metaphor of these kids will eat ice cream for breakfast for all 3 meals a day. We can't put all the power in the kids' hands. You have to be a parent at some point. And yes, kids with ADHD are going to say no to things 1,000 times more than neurotypical kids. They're going to say no to everything that's not, screen-based, instant gratification-based. And kids with ADHD really hate learning curves. If they're not good at it the first time they try it, they don't want to do it. They don't want to have to suck at it a couple of times. They want to be good at it the first time. And we know that's not really realistic. The first time you try a new sport or a new skill or a new talent, you're going to be a beginner for a while until you gain competence. So this whole catastrophic thinking that it's hurting a child to push them into new things, push them out of the house, push them away from screens is wild. And it needs to stop because it's hurting these kids. And, so many parents get stuck under the comfort of the school, the IEP, the 504, the therapists. But I can't tell you how many of these kids are aging out of IEPs, aging out of 504s. They don't last forever, and they don't have the skills and the resiliency to be successful in college or to be successful in employment. So what's going to happen when you have a child who's too old for an IEP, too old for for a 504, can't go to college, can't work? What do? Because we never pushed them out of their comfort zone. They don't have the skill to persevere through a non-preferred task.
So, Mike, the other thing with that, I want to mention is I have the saying that, your child is not your partner in parenting. Because I think to your point, there is a lot of parents have been led to believe, that everything should be negotiated, nothing should be, demanded of kids, that, and we're seeing a lot of over negotiating and over validating, and even I say, over empathizing with kids, right? At the expense of teaching them, hey, this is what's happening. This is what you're doing, and how many times and I would ask the parents who are listening to this, how many times has your child said, no, they don't want to do something, and then they go and they have a good time, or they enjoy it, or they learn that they were good at something that they didn't know that they would be good at. And if kids are not exposed to those experiences, we're denying them an opportunity to build self-confidence. And I think that's the important part that a lot of parents are missing here, that it's denying kids the opportunity to feel good about themselves when they learn what they're good at or what they enjoy.
100%. And we talk about this just about every single podcast episode. What strengthens executive functions, varied experiences, and unstructured play. So I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're ADHD, non-ADHD, neurodiverse, neurotypical. If you stay in your comfort zone all day, every day, you're going to have some problems in life and you're not going to achieve your goals. All of us know, all of us out there that have that live independently, pay the bills, have a family, we got there through struggle, period. Getting a bachelor's degree, getting a master's degree, buying a house, starting a family, having an infant, having a newborn. Those are really stressful, hard times you had to push through to accomplish those goals. So nothing worth having is easy. Nothing worth doing is easy. So if we shelter and coddle our kids from 0 to 18, 0 to 21, and save them from struggle, because all we did was just accept the no. They said they don't want to do that. They said they don't want to do that, and just gave them what they wanted all the time. We're not preparing them for life. And just like I said before, IEPs and 504s are temporary and not permanent. Guess what? So are parents. That this is the scary thing no one ever wants to talk about. You're not going to live forever to help your child. So your kid's going to need the skills to be successful when you're not around anymore, or you're unable to take care of them.
Right. So, Mike, one of the things I talk about the concept, I call it noise, which is arguing or complaining for the sake of arguing or complaining, and that noise often leads to emotional manipulation. And I think it would be helpful if you can talk a little bit about, how can we help parents when their child is making a lot of noise because they're pushing them out of their comfort zone, and what should they do when the child starts with the emotional manipulation? And also, why don't we talk about what that emotional manipulation looks like, and then how parents should deal with it?
Exactly.
Let's start with the noise, I guess, first.
Yeah. So the noise is basically, using language, using emotion, using behavior to sort of, fight back against, completion of any non-preferred task. So noise could just be like anything in terms of, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. That's boring. That's dumb. Sort of just defeating the task that's being asked. And they're just throwing language at you to avoid actually doing the tasks. And what we see is many parents falling for that noise, and they hear kids saying, this is stupid, this is dumb, this is boring, and the parents drop it because they say, oh, he didn't like the task. He thought it was dumb. He thought it was boring. I'm not going to force him to do it anymore. So in many ways, ADHD kids use noise in such unique, powerful ways. Many times they're quite successful with it.
Yeah. And my thing I always teach parents is you don't give attention to noise. Because the more you give attention and validation to noise, the more your child's going to think, oh, I can get out of this. And the more they realize this is effective, making noise, I can probably wear my parent down, right? The more noise I make here, particularly if it's worked before and they have worn you down. And let's face it, that's a normal thing. I mean, when my son was younger, he wore me down by making noise plenty of times, and I just gave in because, I was tired and I was doing this as a single parent. And, we know that it can be draining, but if you give emotional reactivity or attention to noise, we promise it'll continue. So I think that's the key thing, is do not give attention to noise. Do you have anything else that you would suggest around the noise part?
Yeah, we can't be afraid to call noise negative attention seeking. This is another thing that we're seeing on social media circles is, we can't call kids negative attention seeking because then we're saying they're bad kids and we're insulting their character. And there's no such thing as bad kids. This is the trend we're starting to see here. But yeah, kids' brains get stimulated by negative attention. When they feel like they have the power to make mom or dad go from calm, relaxed, focus on their tasks, to angry, upset, frustrated, only focused on them, that's highly stimulating to them. Kids do what works, period. Whether it's praise of you're so amazing, you did so great, or go do this, go do this, go do this, go do this, all focus on them. It's the same stimulation to the brain. So once parents understand that, we're not insulting the kid's character. We're just saying kids do what works. That's it. They do what works. And if you feed into the noise, they're going to keep doing it because it's working.
Well, Mike, let's be real with everybody and also bring up the fact that, with kids making noise, there's been a lot of talk about, that's connection seeking, and when your child makes noise and complains, they're really looking for connection from you. And the reality is that's designed to make parents feel good. Right?
100%. And it's also making the assumption that you're not working hard enough to develop a connection with your child. So if your child's doing connection-seeking behaviors, that means you're not spending enough time on them. You're not spending enough focus on them. And if you're listening to this right now, chances are you focus more on your child than you do yourself. And chances are you focus on your child's health and safety and success more than your own. And you've sacrificed a lot of your goals for your child. So to say your child needs more of a connection from you is utterly ridiculous.
I think, Mike, we'd both agree that any parent who comes to us, we have zero concerns about them having a connection with their child, because if they're taking steps to help their child, they are a highly attentive parent.
Exactly. That's the number one thing. So this whole connection seeking is just one of those things on Instagram where, the catchiest thing is going to get the most shares and the most likes. And the thing that feels the best is going to get the most shares and the most likes. So it's just a positive reframing to make people feel good. And guess what? Raising a kid is messy. Raising a kid is hard. Teaching a kid skills is messy and hard. It's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows and connection seeking. So we can't be afraid to say what things really are.
Thank you for calling that out for exactly what it is.
There you go.
Like that. Yeah. So, Mike, let's talk a little bit about the emotional manipulation piece, because one of the things I explain to parents, and I think you just touched upon this, I say, kids with ADHD are very practical, and if they find something works, they're going to go with it. So often if noise isn't working well enough, then they go to the emotional manipulation, which is things like, you don't care about me, you don't love me, you care about my sister more than me, you wouldn't make me do this if you cared about me. And as we know, for many parents, mothers in particular, that can be extremely effective on them.
Yep. And you tend to see this a lot with screens as well. All my friends have screens. Their parents don't limit screens. They can have any screen they want. They can play whenever they want. And then we start getting into the sympathy-seeking emotional manipulation. If you take my screens away, I'm going to lose all my friends. You're constantly on my back. Nobody wants to be my friend. You're ruining my life. You're this, you're that. So these kids are so unbelievably good at this emotional manipulation, and it works so much of the time because these parents love their kids so much. This is true unconditional love, and these kids use this language that deep down they know isn't true. Deep down they know it's not based in reality. They're saying it to manipulate your emotions of you can't take my screens away because this doesn't happen to anybody else and it will negatively impact my life. And you're the worst parent ever. And my friends have real parents who really love them, and lots of words that really pull at those heartstrings. And, once again, kids do what works. So if they say these things to you and they're able to keep their screens because they successfully made you feel bad, or they say these things to you and they're able to avoid a non-preferred task, they did it. They were successful. So guess what? They're going to keep doing it. You're going to see it more and more and more. So when we give in to the emotional manipulation, we are adding fuel to the fire.
And Mike, I want to clarify for everyone, when we talk about this emotional manipulation piece, when kids are being pushed out of their comfort zone, we're not saying that kids are manipulative of other adults in their life. We're talking about in this specific context, they use emotional manipulation with their parents for this specific purpose of not having to leave their comfort zone. Okay. But it is not any type of character flaw on your child's behalf if they do that. Again, they're being practical. They're doing what they know works or hope will work. So Mike, what would your suggestions be when kids start with the emotional manipulation?
So what you want to do is not provide language to it. You want to be very simple and straightforward. Be short and stay on message. When you do this, then this will happen. If you do this, then this will happen. I hear what you're saying. I'm sorry you feel that way, but such and such needs to get done. So you can validate what they're saying. You can validate their emotions. I see you're upset. I see you don't really want to do this. I see you don't really want to turn your screens off or lose your screens. I'm sorry you think that other parents are better than me. And another big thing for parents is don't start defending yourself. Don't start listing all of the things you do for your kid. I pay for the house. I make your lunch. I wash your clothes. Don't waste your time listing things because that means nothing to the kid. Just very simply say what needs to be done and walk away.
And be aware of not getting pulled into, what I call the argument, reasoning, or negotiation vortex, where, your child tries to argue with you, and typically by the end of the argument, it's not even about what it started about. Or the reasoning vortex is when kids are being inflexible and parents just try to reason with them and explain, well, this is why it would be good if you do this activity, And like Mike just said, you can explain to them the reason why they're doing something and move on from that. You don't need to convince them of anything. They don't need... Let me say it this way. You don't need your child's approval for your parenting decisions. And if there's anything you take away from this episode, I think it's that you don't need your child's approval. And, your child is not your co-parent. They need you to step into their parental authority. They need you to step into your parental authority. Sorry. Mike, what are some other suggestions for helping parents, gently push their kids out of their comfort zone?
So one of the things that I always say that parents kind of get stuck on is, parents will always say, but how do I get my kid to do the task? How do I get him to do the chore, the hygienic task, the homework, the going outside, those sorts of things? What I always tell parents is you don't control your child, but you do control the environment. So you can't physically enforce your child to just go and do these things, but what you can do is you can get the video games out of the house. What you can do is you can unplug the TVs. What you can do is turn off the Wi-Fi. What you can do is have them dropped off at a local YMCA or a library or somewhere else after school. You can call the school and make it mandatory for them to do an after-school club or a sport. You can do whatever you can to get your kid outside of the walls of the home where all the behaviors are. You can get them out of that house as much as possible because that's the right thing to do, and that's how executive functions are going to be developed. So control the environment as much as you can. Whatever the child's triggers are, whatever their comfort zone is that they get stuck in, remove it from the house, get it out of there, or significantly limit it. If they're home and there's no video games, no iPad, no YouTube access, no Wi-Fi, chances are they're going to get really, really bored. And what kids tend to do is attack their parents or follow them around the house and bang on the doors so their parents will entertain them and give them what they want. You need to find ways to get them out of the house. Enlist supporters. Get your community. Get someone to come into the house and hold your child accountable to get them outside. Call other parents and don't be afraid to set up a hangout. Set up, depending on the ages, call them and say, hey, bring, let's have our kids meet, down the street or at the basketball court or at the tennis courts or something. You need to get your kid out of the house as much as possible because those behaviors happen within the walls of the home. So manipulate the home, change the home so they can't get stuck, and get them outside doing unstructured outdoor play.
And well, Mike, the other thing I want to bring up that you mentioned about school activities, I have to tell you, it amazes me how many kids I hear about who are involved in no activities at school. Whether it's elementary school, after school club, middle school, high school, it's incredible to me. And I say to parents, this is a free thing, basically, that you can do. And your child is being part of their school community. Require them to do an after-school activity of some kind.
Exactly. And the reason why so few kids are doing it is because parents are accepting the no. Where parents say, hey, why don't you sign up for this? Why don't you sign up for that? The kid says no because they would much rather just go home and play Fortnite, go home and play Minecraft, go home and sit in front of a screen all day than have to be at school longer doing unstructured social things. The kid says no, and then parents instantly drop it. They want their kid to join the club. They want their kid to be there. They know it's healthy for them, but because the kid said no, the parents said, that's it. I wash my hands of it. He said no, I can't do anything. So if you think a club is beneficial for your child, you think they should be doing it, you're paying some tax dollar money for that school.
Yes.
How about you get your money's worth and have them stay after?
Right. So, Mike, the last thing I want to mention is that, again, referring back to cognitive behavior therapy, there's something that are called exposures. So when somebody has anxiety about something, whether that's fear of a snake, whether it's social anxiety, whatever it might be, what we do is we gradually expose them to the thing that makes them anxious in increasing increments, because when you are exposed to something, what happens is you realize that you have the ability to persevere through anxiety, and you realize that it is not permanent, it is a temporary feeling. So being pushed out of your comfort zone actually makes you resilient and braver. It does not cause trauma. It does not cause any psychological damage. All the research data about this is very clear. When we expose people to things that make them anxious, I'll say in a systematic way, okay, that helps make them braver and it helps build resilience. Same thing with kids. If you expose your child to new experiences, yes, they might not like the first time. Yes, they might make noise. Yes, they might be uncomfortable about, trying something new, but you are helping them by making them braver and realizing that they have it within themselves to persevere through temporary discomfort. And what we know is that the way self-confidence is built is not by your parents telling you how great you are, okay, but self-confidence in kids is built through them recognizing their abilities within themselves.
Exactly. So it's called systemic desensitization. It's like going into a cold pool. It's cold at first, you warm up to it. That whole exposure therapy context. So kids are saying no at the beginning because they don't have the foresight to see themselves eventually enjoying it. And they don't have the hindsight to remember the times that they went through similar type situations and ended up enjoying it. So you're fighting that constant battle. They can't gain competence and confidence from past experiences to apply it to the present, and they don't have the foresight to see, hey, this actually could be good for me. This actually could be fun. So they want to stay in that small, narrow comfort zone in the present. So being that parent that does not accept the no, being the parent that ignores the noise, does not get tricked by emotional manipulation, and is constantly getting their kids out of the house, having real-world, fun, unstructured play with friends outdoors, face-to-face, not on a video game, not on a headset, limit screens. That's what we need to do to set kids up for success.
Mike, to finish up, why don't you explain, briefly about what episodic memory is? And then how about if you explain how often when, kids go to an activity that we have to tap into their episodic memory to help remind them of past successes or things that they enjoyed, and the reason why they don't necessarily remember that. So,
of course. Yeah. So episodic memory is a very specific type of non-verbal working memory hindsight. It's really your autobiographical memory of your hindsight. So instead of just knowing that, a birthday party, like the Merriam-Webster's definition of a birthday party, you remember your specific autobiographical memories of a birthday party. So you're able to remember birthday parties you've been to in the past and remember, hey, I really didn't want to go. I really wanted to stay home and play video games, but I went and I had a great time and we played laser tag and I had pizza with all my friends. I made some new friends. I made people laugh. We had fun. I had a great time. So we can call on that past episodic memory for the next time a birthday party comes up or the next time a social event comes up where our initial fight or flight reaction is, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. We call on our episodic memory. Remember, we didn't want to go, but we did, and we had a great time. So now we call on that to give us confidence for future experiences. And that's really lacking in ADHD. All the more reason why you need to be an authoritative parent. All the more reason why you can't accept the no.
And one of the things I think, just to clarify for everybody, kids with ADHD have a propensity to remember past experiences where there's a strong negative emotion, but they tend not to remember past experiences like Mike was talking about where there's a positive emotion necessarily. Can they remember it? Sometimes, yes, and this really varies, for the kid. But here's the example I always give. I say, let's say, your child went to a summer camp last year. They had a great time. And then you ask them in January if they want to go back and they say, no, it was boring. Well, they don't actually think it was boring. It's because they can't tap into that episodic memory to remember the positive emotions associated with the past experience. So to Mike's point, that's why we have to help them tap into episodic memory to help them remember positive experiences they had and things that they've been successful with and felt good about in the past, because they're not necessarily going to remember that.
Exactly. So, it's so, at the end of the day, it's all about nonverbal and verbal working memory, and they're missing these skills. So we always seem to accept the fact that these kids are time blind, they're stuck in the moment, they're focused on instant gratification, but we don't accept the fact that they're missing self-awareness because of this lack of hindsight. So if they don't have self-awareness and they don't know what's best for them, you as the adult know what's best for them. So we can't let them make all the choices for their life, what they do and what they don't do. We have to be the parents and say, this is allowed, this is not allowed, you have too much of this, it's time for you to get out of your comfort zone. And the more you teach your child to get out of their comfort zone, the more they're strengthening their executive functions and they're more prepared for life after the IEP.
And the more they're strengthening their self-confidence as well, and
100%.
learning about themselves and what they like and what they could be good at.
Quality of life. Yeah.
Yeah, quality of life. There you go. All right, Mike, where can everyone find you?
You can find my website at Grow Now ADHD, and you can find me on Instagram, Grow Now ADHD.
And my website is ADHDdude.com, and you can find me by typing in ADHD Dude on YouTube. And we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Mike's practice, Grow Now ADHD, please visit his website at grownowadhd.com. To learn about the services Ryan provides, please visit ADHDdude.com. You can find Mike on Instagram at GrowNowADHD, and you can find Ryan at the ADHD Dude YouTube channel. The ADHD Guys podcast and content posted by either Grow Now ADHD or ADHD Dude is presented solely for general informational and educational purposes. The use of information on this podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, licensed mental health professional, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining professional advice for any medical or mental health condition they or their child may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.